Hi, everybody. I want to spend a little time today talking about some of the benefits of sharing and using young adult literature with middle and high school students. Um, when we talk about why should kids read? Are there benefits? What's the big deal about reading? Well, as professionals, we need to be able to answer these questions to both our administrators, to the parents of our students, and to the students themselves. We need to be able to explain to them why is it so important that you be a reader. Otherwise, we're going to be having a hard time defending and promoting the adolescent literature that we're having our students read in class, either that we're assigning or that we're having available for them for free choice reading. So let's think about why so many youngsters are turned off by reading. Think about your own experiences with reading when you were in middle and high school. When you were assigned books to read, did you read them or did you not read them? Did you spend your free time reading books that you chose to read on your own? Why do we think that kids are so turned off by reading? Is there any chance it could be teacher attitudes? Think back to your own English teachers. What were their attitudes about reading? There's a lot of different attitudes out there among English teachers about reading. So one of the attitudes that we see sometimes is that the purpose of literature is to make you a cultural person. Well, let's say you're a teen. Does that make you want to read? I need to read because it's going to make me a cultural person. One of the attitudes that we see from teachers is that kids will never get into college if they don't know certain great works. That is absolutely not true. In fact, in a study that was done with English department chairs at Ivy League colleges, those department chairs were asked what texts do kids need to have already read before they come to your college to be successful in freshman English. And overwhelmingly, those department chairs said it wasn't so much which texts they read, it was that they had read and that students had read widely. So what the English department chairs are saying is that students need to have read and to have read widely, not specific texts. Sorry about that. Another attitude that is common among English teachers is that they have the attitude that kids need to get the interpretation of different pieces of literature down because it'll be on the final exam. You have to understand what it is about this book that I'm telling you is important because that's going to be on the final exam. Teachers tell students or have the attitude sometimes that poetry is good for you, kind of like medicine. And sometimes one of the attitudes we see is that we know the literature that we're assigning is hard, but literature isn't supposed to be fun. So with attitudes like that out there, and I'm not saying that every single English teacher has these kinds of attitudes, but when we see attitudes like that out there, it makes it easy to see why youngsters might be turned off to the act of reading. So it's our job to change that. That's a lot of what this course is about. Somebody that I want you to be aware of is a man named Daniel Fader. He wrote a book years ago named Hooked on Books, but it's really a slim volume, great text for you to become familiar with. And one of the things that Fader said in his book is that any librarian or bookseller will tell you that the average modern adult avoids bookstores and libraries as if they were leprosarian. He goes on to say, had the goal of modern performance-oriented education been the creation of unwilling readers and writers, it could not have succeeded more completely. So let's think about that. Think about the adults in your life. How many of them visit regularly bookstores or libraries? How many of you visit bookstores or libraries regularly? If you're an English teacher, I hope the answer is I visit them regularly, and I love it when I go. Fader actually made a case for providing kids with lots of opportunities for reading. He called it a book flood. Kids need to be flooded with books, and this is what we want to encourage in English classrooms at the middle and high school level. A lot of times we see it happening at the elementary level, but not always in middle school. Fader also shared the statistic that 90% of all the books are bought by 10% of the population. So we want to change that. So when we think about the benefits to using literature, there are a number of them that we're going to talk about. So the first one is the idea of literature as enjoyment. What we want to convey to kids is that literature can be enjoyed, and we want kids to be prepared for the experience and to have the maturity to handle it. Young kids, it seems like, have the understanding that literature can be fun, but as kids get older in middle and high school, they sometimes lose that understanding that literature can be fun. So this is a biggie for me. Teachers can't do a good job of communicating that enjoyment for a book that they're not really enthusiastic about. So let's say your district curriculum mandates that you're reading a certain title. If you're not enthusiastic about that title, your kids aren't going to be enthusiastic about it. So you can't be surprised when they complain about it if you don't like it. If there's a book that you absolutely can't stand, you're better off not to have your kids read it, because you're going to convey a dislike for that book, which is in turn going to create a dislike for reading. Literature allows adolescents, it allows all of us really, a chance to escape reality or to confront reality. It helps adolescents be the people that they can really be. If they ever need reassurance about man's inability or compassion, there's a lot of books out there that can give kids hope. When we read literature, it enables us to see what we want to see and hear what we want to hear, but at the same time, it can also challenge us as readers, us or our students, and it helps them recognize that what they think they are isn't always the real truth, but rather that's kind of a veneer, a surface. Another benefit to reading literature is that literature may help adolescents see themselves and their problems. So you know that most kids, young kids or adolescents, kind of have tunnel vision. They think that they're the only ones who are experiencing certain problems, like when they start puberty. Oh my gosh, nobody else has ever had to deal with. But that's not really true. Everybody's had to deal with. So it helps them see their problems and how other characters or other people deal with those problems. Helps them take off the blinders. Most readers react favorably when they read a book with a character who is very much like them. And kids are a little bit surprised sometimes when they realize that the problems that they're dealing with aren't completely unique. They may never tell you about the fact that they kind of found themselves in a book, but for readers, when they get lost in a book, that's often one of the things that's happening. They found themselves in a book. Another benefit is that literature can provide students with vicarious experiences beyond the possibilities of their lifetime or several lifetimes. One of the things we know that happens in schools is that funding gets cut all the time. In fact, we have another legislative session coming up, and we know that school funding gets cut in those legislative sessions. And when funding gets cut, field trips often are one of the first things to get cut. So literature is a great way to provide kids with some of those experiences. They can travel the world through literature. We also know that literature exposes young people to various value systems, ideas, and practices. So when children are young, when they're in elementary school, their value systems and their beliefs, they generally take from their family. They mimic or mirror those beliefs that they see in their family members. As they start to get older and become adolescents, they start to play around and experiment with their value systems and beliefs. They're starting to develop their own understanding of what they truly believe. And literature is a great way for them to try on some different value systems. Not that they're going to stick with those value systems, but they're starting to experience some others. We also know that literature allows young people to observe their language at work. Mentor texts are the current buzzword. And when we're using young adult literature in the classroom, we're giving them the opportunity to see the different ways that authors practice the craft of writing and use the English language. John Green is a great example of this. Any book by John Green, he's the author of The Fault in Our Stars. Pick up any book by John Green and you're going to be amazed at his vocabulary that shows up in his books. And that's a great way for kids to expand their own vocabularies and to start playing around with crafting sentences differently than what they're used to. We also know that reading lets young people discover a world neither all good nor all evil. Think about turning on the news at 5 o'clock every day or at 10 o'clock every day. Sometimes when we watch the news, it feels like everything we see is all bad. There's so much bad news out there. But when kids start to read, they get a balance. There's good and there's evil. Sometimes we think that the reading out there that's available is all bad, but if you read those stories all the way through, you see that they just exude morality. There are often bad circumstances in them, but typically they end in a good way, and there's a lot of morality in those books, so we need to not discount them. We also know that literature allows adolescents to discover truth and reality. So when we think about literature and fiction and poetry and drama, we know that they're all fiction, but literature allows students to get past the facts and the actual events to a higher truth, to that story. And we know that as human beings, we are hardwired for story. There is something about story or narrative and the brain that helps us remember things. So, when we have a kid who wants to learn about the Great Depression, they can read a piece of historical fiction and they can really internalize that story. Very different from looking at a set of statistics from the Department of Agriculture. When we read the story, it really resonates with us and helps us remember it. Finally, we know that in a lot of schools, philosophy courses are no longer offered. I know when I was in high school, that was an option for one of my electives was a philosophy course, but it's no longer available. So in many ways, English language arts and reading classes are the only place where students get to grapple with some of those big issues out there, and they're grappling with them through the reading that they're doing, through both the assigned reading that they're doing for the teacher and the free voluntary reading or the independent reading where they are self-selecting the books that they would like to read. So again, lots of reasons why it's so important for us to be sharing and using young adult literature in our middle and high school English classrooms. Thanks for tuning in.